Hi guys, what is going on, and welcome back to another video on Amazon's New World. So we've been in the playtest now a couple of days, and I just kind of wanted to give kind of my initial feelings. There's definitely some things I've been really enjoying about the game, and there's also some things I think kind of need a little bit of improvement before the game actually gets released kind of next year. I mean, overall my impressions have definitely been really quite good so far. I think, considering we're still in an early beta test, the game seems to run very smoothly. It seems quite well optimized. I was actually able to stream it and play it on my laptop, which is kind of impressive because it's not a particularly high spec laptop. So from this point of view, I think the game seems to work quite well. Easily sort of one of my favourite parts of the game that I've been enjoying so far is kind of the much more evolved crafting system. From sort of very basic stuff like this, from resource collection, through to actually taking these materials inside the city and then using that to do the various crafting and refining stations. Not only do the workbenches actually look really cool, but the UI is really sort of intuitive, and there's just a lot of crafting to get stuck into. There's a lot of very basic stuff at this level, and then there's various different tiers, refined wood, different types of wood, which then feed into other crafting recipes. And it all just feels like quite a nice and well optimized system to use. And there's just a whole range of different trade skills to take advantage of. You know, broken down in here into gathering here on the bottom right. Obviously, these are just your things where you're gathering natural materials in the open world, through to refining, and then through to actually producing sort of end products. And because there's quite a number of different skills to take advantage of, generally I think you're going to find that you're not really going to be able to accommodate them all on your own, and instead you're going to have to sort of be really niching down into certain areas, particularly when it gets to the end products. Like for me, I'm kind of going a little bit down into the engineering branch, mostly because I'm a ranged player. But that means if I want better armor or better weaponsmithing, I'm going to have to work with my guild on someone else who's been focusing on one of those crafting trees, because realistically it's just not going to be possible, at least in the early game, for me to level up all of these, because it's just going to take too much time. And I just think this is one of the areas that I think, partly because I've come from Conqueror's Blade, where the crafting system is so underdeveloped in that game, it feels so nice to have a properly developed, fully player-driven economy and crafting system. And while this is not the first game to, by any stretch of the imagination, to have a fully player-driven economy, there are plenty of other examples out there, there aren't actually that many games that do it. And it is quite a hard thing to do and quite a hard thing to balance. And the fact they've managed to achieve it, I think, is a really good sign. So we can then turn that wood, along with some iron and some feathers, into 100 iron arrows. Although it does kind of seem slightly madness that in this fully player-driven economy, they don't have an actual player-to-player trading system. And the only way you can do it is through the market. The market's great for trading with random players, selling and buying materials you need, but for the fact you cannot currently trade with your clan, there's no guild bank or there's no trade screen, kind of seems to be a feature that is definitely missing at the moment. Combat in New World is perhaps one of the weaker areas, and one that has come into more criticism than others. People have kind of accused it of being sort of excessively simple or just not really all that exciting. And I think there's probably some merit to this. The combat system is built around the use of 3 abilities, plus a dodge, plus a block, if you're using a shield. And so it does make for a relatively simple combat system. But on the small scale, I think it works pretty well in most PvP and PvE fights. You know, the dodge and the block are actually usable, and 3 skills on a relatively short cooldown are kind of enough to manage, at least for me, and I think for most other people. I also haven't run into any server issues, particularly in the PvP stuff. I've not really had any issues with sort of shots missing or server lag or anything like that, which kind of highlights my earlier comments about the game really just feels to actually runs quite smoothly and is well optimized. But I think the problem comes when you start to get into the larger scale fights, the group fights or the boss fights. It's because on these sort of events, I feel like any real sort of skill or elements like that kind of go straight out the window. Everyone's just on a click fest, everyone's just throwing as much damage as they can at a boss and trying to avoid getting hit. And that's really been the same on any MMO for the last 10 years, I think, and it's kind of a hard thing to solve. And despite that kind of problem and the kind of criticism I've heard of that, I think for me, these boss fights and some of the raid groups are some of the most fun I've had in the game so far. Being able to team up with a large group of friends and other players is really kind of what this game is all about, and it's kind of what MMOs have always been about. And I think this kind of nicely transitions into some of the problems that we've heard people talk about with endgame content. I certainly think this is an area of criticism where it actually has some validity. At least early on in the game, you'll find that a lot of the quests are pretty dull and pretty repetitive. Most of the time, you'll just move here, kill X, go back, go to this other town, kill another group of monsters, come back, search chests, etc, etc. And it doesn't make for a particularly exciting introduction into the game. Certainly something that I think Amazon needs to work on to kind of make it a more interesting New World experience. And I think once you start to get to level 20 and those sort of initial do this, do that quests start to end, I think a lot of people then find they don't really know what to do, because there's no real instruction, nothing really to guide you where to go, and that kind of leads to this comments of there's no endgame content. And while I certainly think the endgame content needs to be developed a lot more of it is based around guilds and factions. It's about the factional PvP. It's about the territory wars to claim and hold towns, as well as upgrade them and improve them. It's about doing the raid groups. It's about pushing far north into some of the corrupted territories, fighting bosses like we're doing here, getting into the high level areas and hunting for legendary gear. So I certainly feel there is actually endgame content out there. Although, as I say, certainly something that I think needs to be continued to work on. I'd like to see more added in, and I'd also like to see sort of a better introduction to it for newer players, so people at least have some idea of sort of what they're shooting for and where they're trying to get to. And I think that about sums up my feelings on the game so far. Certainly needs more interesting beginning quests. I think a lot of people are putting a couple of hours into the game and finding that they're just having to walk here, walk there, kill X, kill Y. And because there's not a lot more story, lore, or anything else more interesting surrounding that, they're finding the initial experience quite boring and quite sort of traditionally MMO grindy. I think it's also true at the other extreme that there's definitely more late game content needed. There is some interesting stuff there, particularly once you start to factor in the corruption portals. Hopefully we're going to get some more territory war content in this preview event. Hopefully we'll have a video on that, looking at those big 50v50 sieges. I think they're kind of interesting. And then obviously as you push north into some of the corrupted areas, you run into some quite interesting bosses and some quite high level enemy sort of NPCs, which kind of makes things kind of interesting. But it certainly needs to be a little bit more developed and perhaps a little bit more guided, at least initially, so people kind of know what they're shooting for. And I think that a lot of the problem comes down to the expectations of what people wanted for the game. I think in part it's down to the fact it is made and published by Amazon, and also the fact that expectations of new MMOs are very high. But I think people have been expecting something absolutely groundbreaking and revolutionary, and New World really isn't that. But in a world where we don't have very many high quality MMOs, it really is a very solid, very dependable and very enjoyable base game. And remembering we've still got over 6 months until release, that's quite a lot more time for them to continue to work on it, and even after release it's going to be something that's continually updated. So I think it's already in quite a polished state. I've not had any crashes, it runs really smoothly, and the core game is down, and down well in my opinion. It's just that a little bit more content needs to be developed, a little bit more polishing, maybe a little bit of voice acting put in to kind of give it a little bit more immersion, a little bit more storyline that actually flows and is interesting. Very solid base game. Certainly would recommend checking out the preview event if you haven't already. If you were planning to pre-order at all, certainly recommend you do it while the preview event is on, so you can at least get sort of a bit of a hands-on feel with the game. And if you really hate it, at least you can just refund. Anyway, that's all I've got for you today. Hopefully you kind of enjoyed my initial impressions. We'll certainly be having a little bit of a look at some of the other stuff going forwards. I think I'll probably want to do a crafting video next, because that's the area I really enjoy most about this game. So I kind of wanted to do a bit of a video on that. Anyway, thanks for watching guys, and I shall see you all on the next video.